Hi and welcome back to the course on data integrity and security. As you know, we are covering database security, and in our previous lecture, we covered MySQL. Today we would see how can we install MySQL, which is an open source database, on our computer. For that, you'll have to visit mysql.com and then click on downloads. On the main page, they are talking about MySQL Enterprise Edition, which is not a free version, of course. We'll be installing MySQL Community GPL downloads, and we'll have to download MySQL Installer for Windows. Now, actually, as far as this tutorial is concerned, we need MySQL Installer as well as MySQL Workbench. MySQL Workbench is a small utility which is used to connect to a remote dedicated MySQL database. You can have a dedicated MySQL database server, and other clients can connect to that server using MySQL Workbench. So we'll be installing MySQL Installer for Windows. It would have Workbench, but we'll install it separately to know how can we connect to it in case it's installed as a dedicated server on our environment. So in order to download, we'll have to click on MySQL Installer for Windows. And then you have two options. If you want to install it directly from the internet, you can download this version of 2.3 MB and it would download it live from the internet. If you want to have an offline version of it, it would be downloaded on your computer completely. That is of 435 MB. You'll have to click download over here, sign up, and you'll be able to download the file. Now, as far as the tutorial is concerned, I have already downloaded it. As you can see, I have the files available on my computer. I have different files available on my computer. Now, we'll be installing it today on Windows 11 since that's the latest operating system, and we want to test MySQL database on that. Now, make sure that you have the .NET framework installed on your computer, as well as you need some plugins like Visual C++, etc. in order to continue the installation of it. Now, it's a fresh installation of Windows 11, and we would see if we'll encounter any problems, and that's why I have downloaded the files and we'll install it accordingly. Now, let's start the installation, which is the version which you saw on the website, MySQL Installer Community Edition, and let's start the installation. Now, that's the first interface. As you can see, it's giving you different options over here. If you are installing it as a default developer, it installs all products needed for MySQL development purposes, for testing purposes. If you want to install it as a dedicated MySQL server to which clients would be connecting using MySQL Workbench, you'll be choosing this option. I have installed it on a remote computer. I'll show you, and then I'll show you how can we connect it using the client. Now here, client is if we want to install MySQL Workbench only, and the full version is talking about a complete installation of it. We won't go for the full installation because there are lots of things which we don't want to install. First of all, it would make your installation footprint quite heavy, and the other thing is there will be lots of things installed which you might not need. So I'll select custom over here, and then I'll press next. Now here you have options that which things you want to install. You can click on it. For example, I want to install MySQL server. I'll click on it and click on this arrow, so that would be added, which would be installed. The second option would be Workbench, but I'll install it separately. You have connectors which you need in order to connect depending what kind of application you're installing. I'll connect ODBC connector, which is quite common in order to connect to your database. And if you are using C++ or you are developing an application on .NET or Python, you can select it accordingly. And then you have some documentation and examples available which you can install depending on the kind of setup you have. Now, if you want to select MySQL shell as well, that would give you the option where you will be able to install things using the command line interface. It helps you if you are good in command line interface, but mind it that if you select this option, it will take some time in installation. So I'm keeping it very simple, where I'm installing my MySQL server and the connector for ODBC, and let's proceed with that. Now it's asking you that what would you use it for the development purposes, if it's a dedicated server or a dedicated computer. So since we are doing it for the development purposes over here on this computer, we'll select this option. But previously, if you selected a dedicated server, then you'll be selecting this option, which is where you'll be installing several different applications on this server. But if it's a computer dedicated for running MySQL database server only, you'll select a dedicated computer. Since it would be a development computer, I'll select this option. You can keep the options as default over here. There is no need to change these unless and until there are some requirements on your application. Press next. Strong encryption, it is recommended. We'll keep it like that. Now we'll choose a difficult password for the root access. Now it's recommended to have some accounts over here, which would help you that in case if you forget these passwords, at least the user accounts will be able to access the services. So let's name is admins and let's give it a password. Press OK and then press next. Now it would configure a service on your computer on which it would be running. So we'll keep it MySQL 80 and it's a standard account. Press next and it would write the files on the configuration and press execute. So the configuration is complete. We can press next. We can copy the log to a notepad file just for the ease of access in case we need some information related to that. So we have copied it and we have saved it. Now that's all as far as the installation of MySQL is concerned. Now we'll connect MySQL Workbench just to see how can we install it and how can we configure it in order to connect to a remote dedicated MySQL database server. Now as you can see, you can add a connection over here in order to connect to a remote MySQL dedicated server, or you can click on a local instance. Since we have installed MySQL server, so it has detected it that it is running on this computer. You can double click on it and it would ask for the password that you provided during the installation. So we'll provide the password. And as you can see, now we are connected to our local instance of MySQL server, which is installed on this computer. Now you can click on this server status in order to check the status of this server. And it's showing you that it is connected and it's working perfectly fine. Now it's showing you the complete utilization of your CPU, number of connections, traffic, and all those other things which are here. You can see that if you want to run the SQL queries, you can click on this thing and different options are appearing if you need to connect to a remote database and rest of the options. So that's as far as the installation of MySQL is concerned. Just for your information, if you need to import any data, you can simply click on the import, or if you want to export your current database, you can click on export so that you can create a backup of it. If you need to create a new schema, you can click on this one. If you want to add tables, you can click on these icons. So it's pretty forward, just like we add any tables or anything. For the existing schemas, you can click on this thing and you can find the current tables which are there at the moment. So now I'll show you how can you connect to a remote database server. As you can see, it's showing the local instance of MySQL server which is installed on this computer, so it's connected to the MySQL installation which we conducted on this Windows 11 operating system. Now if we want to connect to a remote dedicated MySQL server, we'll have to add a connection, but before that we'll have to check the connectivity of this remote server. So we'll type in cmd and we'll try to ping the remote server which is responding at the moment. It means that we can reach that server. Then we'll try to add the connection. We'll name it MySQL remote, and then we'll give the IP address of the remote dedicated server. We'll change the username to admins, which is the name that we created when we were installing the remote MySQL dedicated server. Then we'll press test connection and we'll provide the password that we have. For this one, press OK, and you can see that it has successfully connected to MySQL server at a remote location. Now you have two instances available. One is for local and the other one is remote. You can click on it and it would open exactly like we opened the local one. Here you can write the queries and execute it, and you can click on server status to check the overall performance and the utilization of the remote server. So that's how we connect to a remote dedicated MySQL server using MySQL Workbench, and we have covered the installation of MySQL server on this machine. So that's it for today. Thank you very much.